One of my favorite games of all time is Resident Evil 5. And until recently, I didn't realize by loving and supporting this game, what I was actually supporting was
racism.
That's right. IGN thinks Resident Evil 5 is racist. And given that Resident Evil 5 is one of my favorite games of all time,
I took offense to that.
So, I think it's time that we dive into IGN's woke take on why Resident Evil 5 can't be remade. Let's begin.
Resident Evil 5 simply can't be remade, at least not to the standards of Capcom's best work. And so the answer is not to remake, but to rewrite. It features a constant flow of horrific imagery, but Resident Evil 5 is an action game through and through. Resident Evil 5 has no interest in this, with the majority of its stages being little more than corridors peppered with dead ends to hide treasures in. Their lack of authenticity means no one will ever mention the Kajuju Autonomous Zone in the same breath as the Spencer Mansion.
Okay, so the first part of this video does bring up some valid points. Resident Evil 5 definitely took a step away from the dark horror theme of previous games and instead opted for a more action-focused, balls-to-wall shoot-'em-up style. But apart from the difference in location and the color palette of the game, Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5 both felt very similar to play. Both games focused far more on annihilating large waves of zombies, as opposed to a more bullet-scarce survival horror feel of the first three games. But do you know what Resident Evil 5 did have that none of the previous installments did? Multiplayer. And this single reason alone is why Resident Evil 5 is still one of my favorite games to this day. Sitting on a couch with your friend and coming up against the first onslaught of zombies in Chapter 1 Part 2 is one of the most fun opening multiplayer missions in any game I have ever experienced. Then making your way through the hostile town environments, swamp areas, all the way to the large industrial zones, cargo ship, and insanely over-the-top ending of a boss fight in a volcano left an impression on me I've never forgotten. For all of Resident Evil 5's flaws, it managed to succeed in the one place that any good game needs to. It was fun. So maybe Resident Evil 5 didn't have a distinctive horror feel like the previous installments, but saying that the areas in this game are unmemorable and that the game needs to be rewritten is just wrong, considering that Resident Evil 5 is the fourth best-selling game in the entire franchise. I'd hazard a guess and say it'll do just fine if it's remade. But with all that being said, that isn't the reason this IGN video is receiving so much backlash. This is
Resident Evil 5's most notorious problem: racism.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Set in a fictional West African country, Resident Evil 5's primary antagonists are black people. Yes, it's technically the Ouroboros virus that protagonist Chris Redfield is fighting, but the parasite's host is depicted as a nation of mobs and primitives who are violent even before their infection.
Okay, this is where IGN fucked up and became completely woke. So IGN says that Resident Evil's antagonists in this game are black people, and Lord of the Rings is just a film about a little person returning a bit of lost jewelry. See, you can make anything sound bad by just giving misleading information. Now, I have just a couple of things to point out here. First of all, the antagonists in this game are zombies, not people. And number two, in a study done on the population in South Africa, it comprises of 75% black, 14% white, 9% Asian, and 2% Indian, meaning the majority of people in Africa are black. And as for saying the antagonists in this game are nothing more than just mobs and primitives, and that they were depicted as being violent before the infection even started to outbreak, is just straight up untrue and offensive. The only part of Resident Evil 5 you see pre-infection is literally the first walkthrough area, and that lasts anywhere from 2 minutes to 20 seconds. And even then, there's already signs of the infection having begun. Yes, some areas in Resident Evil 5 are depicted to be in rural areas which comprise of huts and other similar structures. But given that 30% of the African population are made up of small groups or tribes, to me shows inclusion of a rich wealth of culture and diversity Africa has, and makes the most of numerous interesting settings the continent has to offer. Resident Evil 5 has areas spanning from small villages to inner cities, all the way to advanced testing facilities. But IGN conveniently ignored all that because it's way easier to label a game racist if you don't mention those things. But much like the late and great Billy Mays, IGN has more.
In the 2020s, in a post-Black Lives Matter world, there is only one acceptable response to a white man shooting waves of Africans for an entire video game. No.
You fucking donut.
A white man shooting waves of Africans just no. You can make anything sound bad by just giving misleading information. Seriously, what planet is this moron on? The way he says this, like the plot and motivation for this game is just some weird racist murder holiday, when in actual fact, the game's plot is as follows. Chris is deployed in Kajuju, Africa to join Sheva Alomar in the apprehension of Ricardo Irving, who is attempting to smuggle and sell bioorganic weapons. Now, again, there's a few points I need to make here. First of all, there are two protagonists in this game. One is Chris Redfield, an American white male. The other is a black African female named Sheva Alomar. So, boiling this game down to a white man shooting waves of Africans is just fucking insane and straight up incorrect. Not only that, I don't want to keep harping on about the same point, but in this game, you're gunning down zombies, not people. Personally, I think that's a pretty important distinction to make. You can make anything sound bad by just giving misleading information. And the same goes for the motive for why you're killing the zombies in this game. It isn't race or anything like that. It's simply down to the fact that zombies are ravenous killing machines, and they stand between you and your main adversaries in this game, Irving and Wesker. So please, IGN, in the words of Joey Swoll,
you need to do better.
And that brings us to the last part of this dogshit woke video.
Even with a vastly improved, more sensitive take on the continent, perhaps one with a black protagonist,
You can't be serious.
and a more empathetic look at the outbreak, the experience would simply be too divorced from the original to hold the name Resident Evil 5. So where does Capcom go now? In this moment, the future of Resident Evil becomes unclear. Capcom has given itself the freedom to do whatever it wants. I just hope it's not a remake of Resident Evil 5.
Well, IGN, I hope given your terrible misguided view on Resident Evil 5 that no one listens to you. Because if Capcom does choose to remake this absolute gem of a game, we could be in for one of the best split-screen multiplayer zombie games ever made. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash the like button, and as well, let me know your thoughts in the comment below of IGN's review on Resident Evil 5. Until then, hopefully I'll see you in the next one.